Book 53 of 2020 was Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. So I've read Charles Dickens before. I studied Great Expectations and I think Hard Times, but I didn't actually pick an essay on it when I was at university. And I've read A Christmas Carol. And so I decided to read Oliver Twist because I'd seen little snippets of the film and thought I had a kind of general idea of what the plot was. Although interestingly, I didn't know who Monks was and I didn't know kind of how the whole plot kind of unfolds. And so that was interesting. I really liked when I first started reading this, the kind of social commentary, political satire that Dickens employs, because it is mocking the views of the wealthy Victorians at that time, in the sense that they have this viewpoint that poor people are like that because it's their own fault and they've done stuff to deserve being like that, which is interesting because nothing's changed. You know, the ruling elite still believe that the poor are poor because of things that they've done and not because of social inequalities. And Oliver Twist is really kind of an allegory of social inequality, in the sense that the character demonstrates the impact of labelling and how that labelling has a detrimental impact on your ability to become socially mobile within society. Because Oliver is an orphan and he's been labelled as poor and been treated as such, and kind of almost been viewed as if he's never going to be any better than his current situation, which when you actually find out, you know, his background, it demonstrates that this isn't the case and that it's this labelling that's created this outcome and not his actual character and what he's actually like as a person. Dickens also demonstrates the hypocrisy of the ruling class with characters such as Mrs Mann, Mr Bumble, Monks, because they're all motivated by self-interested profiteering at the expense of others. So all they care about is making money and kind of getting one over on other people, and they don't really care about like justice, or they don't really have any goodness in them. And Dickens is really kind of good as well, in the sense that he's used a child as this character, and by using children, it's demonstrating this kind of like innocence. So a child can't really, you know, make decisions for themselves, and because they have like an innocence, it's like you're basically suggesting that a child is responsible for, you know, criminal acts and things like that. And you know, sociologically, this hints at the kind of correlation between structural inequality and crime, because the structure of society is forcing people to commit acts in order to survive. So in the case of Oliver was treated really badly and ends up being kind of adopted by the Artful Dodger and by what's his name? I've forgotten his name. Oh, the Jew guy. Fagin. So I'm saying the Jew guy because in there it refers to him as the Jew. A bit anti-Semitic, I guess, but you referred to things differently, I guess, in those days. And in order to kind of be looked after by Fagin, Oliver is forced to become a criminal and, you know, steal handkerchiefs and things like that, in the way that Charlie and the Artful Dodger are. And it's not really, you know, he doesn't want to do it. It's not, you know, reflective of who he is as a person and his kind of, you know, integral character, but he's being forced into it due to his circumstances. And this kind of demonstrates how the judgment of the ruling class on people who are poor means that they judge them by their circumstances and not by who they are as people. And so they kind of look at the situation and they kind of, okay, they're poor, it must be because they're lazy, it must be because they've not worked hard enough or whatever, without recognising that there are inequalities within society. Because from the ruling elite's perspective, there is no inequality. You know, they believe in meritocracy, they believe that everyone's got a fair and equal opportunity, without recognising kind of, you know, ancestral wealth and opportunities that they've got and things like that. So I found this very, very interesting that Dickens was spotting these things in Victorian times, because nothing's changed in society. Like, this is still happening. The ruling elites are still, you know, neglecting the populace who are in situations of social inequality. It's always the case. Whilst Dickens is very notable for his characterisation, so, you know, he's great, like, the way that he describes characters, they become very real and three-dimensional, and you can imagine them, and obviously this is why he is very kind of famous, in the sense that a lot of his books have been made into film and to, you know, series and things like that, because he does create great characters. But personally, I find his writing style really laboured and really kind of laborious to read. It's just not an enjoyable read. Like, you have to kind of push yourself through it, and I imagine that it's got something to do with the fact that a lot of his stories were serialised initially, so they're not really meant to be like in a novel and in chapters. So maybe that has something to do with it, because I guess if you were, you know, wanting to find out what happened next, then you might just like have it in little bits, so you wouldn't really kind of mind the way that it's written. But personally, I just found it a bit like tiresome to get through, and I've found that with all of his books. Like, Dickens is not a writer that I warm to. It's not my preference of writing style, and this is the last book that I'm going to read of his, because I've been given, you know, I thought with the other ones like Great Expectation and Hard Times, maybe they're not as famous, maybe they're not as good. So I obviously read the Christmas Carol, and I read this one because I know this one's really famous, and they're the same really, although this is better in the beginning part of it, because then I think that's more because I'm interested in politics and stuff like that, so maybe that's why. So yeah, I gave it 2 out of 5 stars just because it's not for me, although I do appreciate the characterisation, the political commentary and things like that. But yeah, unless you like Dickens, I wouldn't recommend it to read.